The only people who don't want to disclose the truth are people with something to hide.
Please say good morning and welcome back to 710 KNUS. Montgomery Sibling is our guest. I'm a huge fan. Good morning, welcome back, and thank you, and Merry Christmas.
Well, Peter, thank you so much for having me on the show.
Yeah, if you would, a quick bio so people get a sense of you, and I got a couple lead-in questions.
Oh, great. I've practiced law for 30 years. I got disgusted with the legal profession, so went on to do some other things, but was drawn into an interesting legal question that arose in the District of Columbia, where I live, regarding a fugitive from justice named Elizabeth Duke, which I think one of your other guests had mentioned a couple days ago.
If you would.
Well, briefly, Elizabeth Duke was indicted along with 5 other people for bombing the U.S. Capitol building back in the early 1980s, along with several other buildings here in Washington, D.C. She jumped a $300,000 bail and became a fugitive from justice in 1988. And her 5 other co-conspirators were found guilty, and they each got 20 years in prison. Subsequently, they were pardoned by Mr. Clinton in the later days of his administration.
It's amazing, isn't it?
It really is. But what happened was a very tenacious investigator named Martha Trowbridge and Neil Sankey had come across a curious fact in April of 2009, about 3 or 4 months after Mr. Obama took office. The indictment against this Elizabeth Duke, charged with bombing the U.S. Capitol, was dismissed.
Yep.
And they asked me to look into it because I have the sort of legal forensics to look at a legal matter, much the way a doctor looks at an X-ray, and come up with information that most people can't see.
You know, it's fascinating, the role of the Clintons and, of course, Barack Obama and who Valerie Jarrett is and the people who I believe wrote his biography. It isn't my work. It's Jack Cashell's work. I'm sure you're familiar with this. These were people who did everything in their power to destroy this country, not end a war, but destroy the country. And yet many of them have academic positions today. They are respected. And in the case that you're talking about, the case of Elizabeth Duke, where is Elizabeth Duke now?
I cannot answer that question because I've been barred from asking that question of the people who actually have the answer to that question.
And who, again, take it back to Elizabeth Duke and what was her role in what she was doing?
Well, she was one of the conspirators arrested and indicted by a grand jury for bombing the U.S. Capitol, the Navy Yard, and other buildings in D.C. When she was arrested, she was in a car with one of the members who had robbed the Brinks robbery in Long Island, or at least assisted after the fact by providing medical assistance. Those 2 were arrested at that time on the indictment for bombing the U.S. Capitol, and they had in their possession keys to a garage full of dynamite that had been stolen from someplace in Texas. And the details are a little foggy for me, but they're all of record. And they also found false IDs and materials to make false driver's licenses, which back in the 80s weren't quite as sophisticated as we have them now today.
See, and I'm a believer, by the way, Bill Ayers I personally believe, and I'm working off of Jack Cashell's great work. I don't know if you believe Bill Ayers wrote Barack Obama's, quote, autobiography, but I do. And Ayers' wife, Bernadine Doran, and their role, and one of the things that they did do was they manufactured phony ID when they were in the Weather Underground. And it's important to regress this to what was called the Port Huron Statement after the creation of the SDS. And then from the SDS comes a more radical group called the Weathermen and the Weather Factor. And their motto was, bring the war home, put the bomb in the belly of the beast. And that's Bill Ayers. And that's Bernard. You pick it up. I'm sorry.
Well, no, that's exactly right. And they became the Weather Underground, and they've been underground, but they haven't gone away as far as I can tell.
Well, not only that, they become above ground and become professors and in the case of Ayers, his role in the creation of Barack Obama is still a mystery.
Well, it is. And let me just finish up the story. I know we don't have all day, although we can talk all day. But 21 years later, on June 17th, 2009, a magistrate in the district court in Washington, D.C., holds a hearing, and a U.S. attorney walks in and says, we're dismissing the indictment against Elizabeth Duke. And this magistrate then signs an order saying, because the government showed me good cause, I'm going to dismiss the indictment against Elizabeth Duke. And the curious thing about this, Peter, is that, one, she's a magistrate, which means she's not a real judge. She's what we call an Article I judge. She does not have authority to dismiss an indictment. Only an Article III judge, a federal district court judge, can dismiss an indictment. And she lies in the order she signs, saying that she was shown good cause. Because I finally, after litigation, pulled the transcript of the hearing, and the U.S. attorney says no such thing. He just says, I'm moving to dismiss the indictment. Now, just as a little background, indictments are regularly dismissed for good cause, like the person has died, so they don't want to leave it on the record clogging the docket. Or they've been convicted of other crimes and never getting out, so why waste taxpayer money just gilding the lily, if you will. Or they've been declared clinically insane, they'll never be able to stand trial. Those are very good reasons, and the records are peppered with those reasons. But in this case, this Magistrate Robinson signed the order saying I was shown good cause, which she was not, and then she signed it not as a magistrate judge, but as a federal district judge, which is impersonating a federal officer, which is a felony. So when this information finally came out through my efforts, I then went to the court and said, you've got a felony on your hands, and there was no good cause shown. You need to react. The presiding judge in the District of Columbia refused to do anything. I went to the Court of Appeals. They refused to do anything. And I went to the Supreme Court and said, you have an obligation to maintain the hygiene of your system. You have a magistrate judge impersonating a district court judge, falsifying the record. You may not sit by and allow this to go on. And, of course, the Supreme Court said nothing. And that's where that particular story ends at this point in time. So Elizabeth Duke's identity was not able to be determined, and we were unable to pursue the matter beyond that because the courthouse doors are closed to those who question the status quo.
You know, if you're just joining us, there is an ever-growing number of very brave men and women, and Montgomery certainly is one of them, who are questioning the truth of these last years, the creation, I believe, of Barack Obama. Yesterday we had, and he's fascinating if you ever get a chance to sit and listen to Roger Stone speak about Bill Clinton. And I've been chasing and reading Bill Clinton probably for, 20 years. And no one's ever been able to uncover why Bill Clinton never got a degree from Oxford and why that terminated. And there was always the speculation about Bill Clinton going into the Soviet Union and those things. He's found a woman who Bill Clinton raped. She was a 19-year-old girl, found her in a pub, and her name is Eileen. I can't think of her last name. I can look at my notes. But she was 19 at the time Bill Clinton raped her in London, or in Oxford, pardon me, and was sent home. And let's see what happens to that story. It's a story like this. How does and where is Elizabeth Duke, and why does she vanish off the radar screen? And is it because, and again, I look at Bill Ayers. Bill Ayers is a professor. Bernadette's a professor. They were clearly involved, along with Valerie Jarrett, in creating Barack Obama. Do you have any question that isn't so, Montgomery?
Well, I believe there are legitimate questions that we as citizens have the absolute right to have answered. And our legislatures are paralyzed by the money that controls them. And if our judiciary will not do what they're supposed to do, which is to, engage the engine of truth to answer these legitimate questions, then I think we have a real problem with the present structure of our government. And I've come to the point where I believe the three branches of government being not responsive, it's time for us to invoke Article 5 and call a constitutional convention by the states to realign the power structure and give life to the 10th Amendment, which resides in the people and the states respectively, those powers not expressly granted. So I think it's time we redefine what's been expressly granted to the government and the role of those officers of the federal government.
I looked at my notes. Her name is Eileen Wellstone. She was 19, and she met Bill Clinton in a pub near Oxford, 1969. That's when he was expelled from Oxford. And like I said, there's more than you and I will ever know, but certainly what we can chase. So coming full circle, tell the story again. As you know, in the United States of America, and actually the creation took place at Ann Arbor, Michigan, University of Michigan, and all those, the former Mr. Jane Fonda was there, and those that inner circle, they created the Weathermen. They took the line from Bob Dylan, you don't need to be a weatherman to know which way the wind blows. They formed the Students for a Democratic Society, and sort of their military wing of that was the Weather Underground, the SDS, that forms the Weather Underground. Bill Ayers is a member. I believe, obviously, that Elizabeth Duke was a member. Do you believe that she was a member of that?
There's no question from the documentation that Neil Sankey obtained from the FBI through Freedom of Information request, although heavily, heavily redacted for no good reason we can tell 30 years later, that she was associated with this group. I mean, she was found arrested in a car with a known member of the group. So that goes without saying. The real question is, where does her life intersect with Mr. Obama's life? And, Peter, I don't, profess to have the answers to these questions. I just believe they deserve to be asked and answered in a responsive democratic society. And it's clear in every turn that we're not getting the answers because we're blocked. I didn't really want to go deeply into this, but I actually ran for president in 2012 so that I would have standing to challenge the election of Mr. Obama. And I filed lawsuits saying under D.C. law, he has to prove his legitimacy, and he didn't do so. And the answer of the courts, again, up to the Supreme Court, was that you don't have the right to ask the question. Only somebody who actually was a candidate in all 50 states can ask the question. And, of course, Mr. Romney would not engage in that because he's part of the same power elite here. They just they just shift chairs.
No, you're on the money. Let me do this. I need to take a pause. When we come back, and again, this growing number of people like yourself who legitimately ask the question, who is Barack Obama? And so when I've done this now for some six and a half years, and it's really interesting. The critics have backed off. They don't exist anymore, but I was the biggest racist in radio, and I was this, and I was that. But systematically, that drumbeat has become silent. And now I think they sit there, the one-time critics, and they're at least legitimately saying, you know what, he can't prove who he is. He can't. The story has changed so many times. When I meet smart people like you, and I always say, who is Barack Obama? And they always say, I don't know, and then there's a but. So I'm going to ask you this question when we come back. Montgomery, when we come back, who is Barack Obama? 710 KNUS, I'm Peter Boyles. Good morning. Website is 710knus.com. Online with us, again, the ever-growing number of, I think, extremely smart people who are brave enough to say, who is Barack Obama? Montgomery Sibley is with us. I get to ask that question, I guess. Who do you believe, sir, Barack Obama really is?
Well, Peter, I can only give you three answers. And I guess the first one is he's somebody who employed the Department of Justice to get this indictment dismissed against Elizabeth Duke. And a little backstory I haven't had a chance to give you, I'll take a moment, is that the judge or magistrate judge who dismissed it, Deborah Robinson, her son was arrested in Baltimore 6 months before for distributing cocaine with an armed weapon.
There you go.
And under Maryland law, he was looking at 20 years in Maryland prison, which is one of the toughest, meanest prisons in our nation. And the rate of individuals who are injured and killed in that prison is one of the highest in the country. Apparently, right after the election, all of a sudden the state prosecutors turned the case over to the federal prosecutors, who gave him a plea deal of less than 5 years at what we call Club Fed up here in Maryland, which is a federal prison where the prison inmates actually have credit cards to use the vending machines. They have a tennis court they're able to use and a workout facility. And in response, apparently a month after that plea deal is finalized, she comes into court and dismisses an indictment without grounds, falsifies the record, and, of course, forges her signature as a district court judge. So there's a man, to answer your question, who apparently, for reasons we don't know why, on a fugitive warrant, which is never dismissed, utilizes that pressure to make it happen. Secondly, I would say this is a man, when I subpoenaed, as I did in one of my lawsuits, his Social Security Administration records, as well as his registering for the draft records and his college records, all of a sudden, out of nowhere, a judge who has nothing to do with the case comes in, takes over the case, and dismisses it. So all my subpoenas are therefore void. No one has to respond to them. Nobody did. And finally, this is a man who gives us a birth certificate but won't let us see it. Remember, only one person was allowed to see that birth certificate, and then gives us a copy. But even the copy is so full of questionable anomalies that any forensic expert who looks at documents comes away shaking their head saying, how can this be anything but a forgery? Because there are different typefaces, the words don't match, there's all kinds of anomalies. Yet with these very legitimate questions, we can't get to the prosecutors. They're all tied up. We can't get to the grand juries because the federal prosecutors won't let us there, and the judges won't enforce the clear statutes that allow us access to the grand jury, who has the power to issue subpoenas that cannot be quashed. So my answer is, who is the man? I don't know, but he certainly behaves in a way as if somebody, as if he's somebody who doesn't want his past uncovered. And if you're that kind of person, in the law we say if it looks like a duck, it quacks like a duck, and walks like a duck, it probably is a duck. And I think on that grounds alone, we have reason to believe this man is a complete fraud.
Yeah, I mean, if you think about it, he has hidden his, along with tremendous help, and the mainstream media's laydown, he's hidden his birth, his medical, his educational or travel records. He has, I personally believe, and I think all the indicators, he applied for college aid as a foreign student, and then, of course, has denied that he's a foreigner. He has an SSN that he uses from a state he never lived in, and these are all extremely provable. That it isn't something that you and I are making up on a talk show.
Well, no. And, Peter, I went down personally to the National Archives to pull the arrival records in the Commonwealth of Hawaii when he and his mother allegedly arrived. And while every other arrival record, because they would fill it out much like a visa back then, is there, the day that he and his mother arrived is missing from the archives. The microfilm has been cut, patched, and it's gone. So someone physically went in there and actually removed national records to block the proof that he arrived or did not arrive when he alleged he did in Hawaii back in the 1960s.
I mean, every American president since George Washington, we know exactly where they were born. We don't know where Barack Obama was born. We have seen a birth certificate that proclaims father's race as African, and African, as we both know, is not a race. We can go down a list of things, but here's a question as we come up on time. We'll get you back after the holidays. Will there come a time, Montgomery, when all the things that you want to know and so many others want to know, will that time ever come when we finally see the truth?
Well, I hope it's in my lifetime, Peter, and yours as well. But frankly, if we continue to throw straw onto this fraud, this camel's back of fraud, sooner or later somebody will throw the last straw that will break the back, and the whole thing will come crashing down. And I believe we'll see the truth, and we'll uncover what has been a massive behavior, both before and after the fraud, that will implicate the highest power structures in this country. And it's about time we call them to account.
What I think is interesting is, because his nomination happened here, he was never vetted, never doctored, never looked at. And this will take on the questions to the Denver Post and to the national television audiences and the national media, to the Republican Party, is going to be, why didn't you do your job? And why did you believe what's obviously overwhelmingly a lie, or a series of lies? And I don't think that they can, I don't think Brian Williams, I don't think the New York Times, I don't think they could withstand that. I've been told numbers of times by ranking people in private conversations, oh yeah, sure, we know. And then I say, why don't you do something? And I get the head turn. This is Montgomery Sibley. I'm a big fan. He did a piece on a woman by the name of Elizabeth Duke, how she got walked out. She's clearly a bomber out of the 60s, but then so is so many of these other people that surround Barack Obama. They're radical left advocates out of the 60s and 70s. And I do believe this as we go to the end of it. I believe his biological father is Frank Marshall Davis. I don't believe he's the other Barack. I believe the history of his mother is so locked away. I believe that this guy has been a creation, but I don't know who created him.
Well, and, he's left 216 federal judges behind.
Oh, yeah.
Regardless of anything else, we're going to be living his legacy for quite some time.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that to me is troubling. And Peter, I know we only have a couple more minutes. I would just end on this. I've become a firm believer that we really do need a state-called convention to rein in the federal government, which is a structure now which allows these kinds of shenanigans to proceed, which co-ops the media, which wants little tidbits for their news bites every 30 seconds on the cable news networks. And as a result, we don't have a fourth estate looking over the government's shoulder anymore. And the only way to really, resolve all this is to call a states convention and strip the federal government of so much of the power they've assumed, which isn't even impliedly delegated to them in the Constitution, but they've taken it on without any natural enemies to, levy a coup d'etat against this.
Yeah, but I can't imagine.
Article 5 convention.
I can't imagine our governor, John Hickenlooper, or for that matter, Andrew Cuomo, ever agreeing to anything that would,
well.
Yeah.
With due respect, Peter, and I'll just end with this, it only takes 34 states to call a convention, and the best legal scholarship says we're at 33. We are one state short from demanding a state convention to propose, not amend, but to propose amendments to the Constitution, which thereafter have to be approved by 3/4 of the states. So this isn't special interest running in and changing the Constitution. This
Agreed.
is just the engagement of a national dialogue initiated from the state rather than the federal level of what we need to do to keep this country back on the course that it was originally intended. And we're only one state away, and there are states within the sound of your radio show that, all they have to do is call for the convention, and the Supreme Court is going to be obligated to force Congress to convene that convention to propose amendments. So that's where my life and energy is now, because I don't think we can expect anything out of the status quo, as they've repeatedly proven.
Merry Christmas, and we'll talk after the first of the year. You're the man, Montgomery. Thanks for everything you're doing, and we'll talk right after the first of the year. Thank you, sir.
Well, Peter, just remember, you get up every day and do it, and that's the real heavy lifting around here. For that, I thank you.
Thank you, brother.
The only people who don't want to disclose the truth are people with something to hide.